Emily always believed that trust was the quiet foundation of a happy marriage. It wasn't something she talked about often, but it was something she lived by every single day. For 8 years, her life with Daniel had seemed steady and certain, the kind of relationship people admired without question. Friends often joked that they were the perfect couple. They laughed together at gatherings, remembered every anniversary, and rarely argued in public. From the outside, their marriage looked effortless, but perfection is often just a well-kept illusion. The first strange feeling arrived on an ordinary evening. Daniel had come home later than usual, dropping his keys on the table with a distracted look on his face. Emily noticed it immediately. Normally he would greet her with a smile or ask about her day before doing anything else. That night, he barely made eye contact. He walked straight to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and kept glancing at his phone like he was waiting for something. Emily tried to ignore the tiny knot forming in her chest. Everyone has stressful days. She reminded herself of that while finishing dinner and chatting about small things. Daniel answered her questions, but his responses felt short and distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Later that night, while they sat on the couch watching television, his phone buzzed softly on the table. Emily didn't think much of it at first. Messages were normal. What caught her attention was how quickly Daniel grabbed the phone. His reaction was instant, almost defensive. He turned the screen away before reading the message, then typed something quickly. Emily said nothing, but the moment stayed in her mind. Daniel had never been secretive with his phone before. In fact, he often left it lying around without concern. They had always lived with an unspoken understanding that neither of them had anything to hide. That simple trust had always made their marriage feel safe. Over the following weeks, small things began changing. At first, the changes were so subtle that Emily struggled to explain them even to herself. Daniel started working late more often. Some nights he arrived home exhausted, claiming that his office had become extremely busy. Other times he seemed strangely energized despite the long hours. Emily listened, nodded, and tried to be supportive. She knew how demanding his job could be. Still, the uneasy feeling continued to grow quietly in the background of her thoughts. One evening she noticed him smiling at his phone while standing near the window. The smile disappeared the moment he realized she had walked into the room. He locked the screen immediately and slipped the phone into his pocket. The moment lasted only seconds, but it felt unusually tense. Work message, Daniel said quickly, almost before she could ask anything. Emily forced a small smile and nodded. She didn't want to appear suspicious or insecure. Trust had always been the strength of their relationship, and she refused to let doubt destroy something that had taken years to build. Yet the patterns kept repeating. Daniel began stepping outside to answer calls. When Emily asked simple questions about his day, he sometimes hesitated before replying, as if carefully choosing his words. Occasionally he seemed distracted during conversations, barely listening while scrolling through messages. None of it was obvious enough to accuse him of anything. Each moment could easily be explained away. But when Emily looked at the situation as a whole, it felt different. One night she woke up in the middle of the night and noticed the empty space beside her in bed. The house was silent except for the faint glow of light coming from the living room. Curious, she walked down the hallway and saw Daniel sitting on the couch, typing on his phone. He quickly locked the screen when he noticed her. Couldn't sleep, he said casually. Emily nodded again, pretending nothing seemed unusual. But her heart felt strangely heavy as she returned to the bedroom. She hated the thoughts forming in her mind. Suspecting the person you love most in the world feels almost like betraying them yourself. Emily kept reminding herself that Daniel had never given her a real reason to doubt him before. 8 years of marriage couldn't suddenly collapse because of a few odd moments. Still, The silence between them slowly grew. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt slightly forced. Daniel still kissed her goodbye every morning and asked about her day, but something underneath those routines felt different. The warmth was fading, replaced by a quiet distance Emily couldn't fully understand. Then one afternoon something happened that she couldn't easily ignore. Daniel had left his phone charging on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. Emily wasn't trying to snoop. In fact, she barely glanced at the phone at first. But when the screen lit up with a new notification, her eyes instinctively moved toward it. A name appeared briefly across the screen. It wasn't anyone she recognized. The message preview disappeared almost immediately as the screen dimmed again. But the moment had already planted a deeper question in Emily's mind. She stood there for a long time, staring at the silent phone, for the first time since their marriage began. A quiet and unsettling thought entered her heart. What if Daniel was hiding something? Emily tried to convince herself that the unfamiliar name on Daniel's phone meant nothing. People received messages from coworkers, clients, and random contacts all the time. One notification didn't prove anything. Still, the moment kept replaying in her mind long after Daniel came out of the shower and casually grabbed his phone without noticing her quiet tension. For the next few days she acted exactly the same. She smiled during breakfast, asked about his schedule, and continued their daily routines. On the surface nothing had changed. But internally, Emily had started paying attention to details she had ignored before. Patterns began to appear. Daniel's late nights were becoming more frequent. At first he claimed it was a temporary workload, but the excuses started sounding almost rehearsed. Some evenings he would say he had an important meeting. Other nights it was a last-minute project that needed urgent attention. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own, yet together they felt strangely repetitive. Emily noticed something else too. Whenever his phone buzzed, Daniel checked it immediately. Sometimes he stepped into another room before responding. If she happened to walk nearby, he would lock the screen quickly and shift the conversation to something unrelated. One evening during dinner, his phone vibrated on the table between them. Emily glanced at it naturally, the way anyone might. Daniel reacted before she could even read the notification. His hand moved across the table so quickly that it almost knocked his glass of water over. He picked up the phone, looked at the screen for a second, then flipped it face down. "Work stuff," he muttered, barely meeting her eyes. Emily nodded quietly, but the reaction felt stronger than the situation required. If it truly was work, why hide it so quickly? Later that night Daniel told her he needed to travel for a short business trip the following week. The announcement came casually, almost like he had mentioned it in passing before. Emily frowned slightly. "You never told me about a trip." "It just came up today," he replied. "Last-minute meeting with a client." His explanation sounded smooth, but something about the timing bothered her. Daniel usually discussed work travel in advance. This sudden trip felt rushed. Emily wanted to ask more questions, but she stopped herself. Part of her still feared that her growing suspicion might be unfair. Accusing someone you love without proof could damage a relationship just as much as a real betrayal. Days passed, and Daniel left for the supposed trip early one morning. Emily watched him pack the night before. He seemed unusually careful with his phone, keeping it close even while folding clothes into his bag. After he left, the house felt strangely quiet. Emily tried to focus on her own responsibilities, but the uneasy thoughts kept returning. That evening, while cleaning the living room, she noticed Daniel's old laptop sitting on a shelf. He rarely used it anymore since switching to a newer one for work. Without thinking much about it, she opened it just to check something unrelated. The computer powered on slowly. Emily wasn't searching for evidence. At least, that's what she told herself. But curiosity quietly guided her fingers across the keyboard. She opened the email account Daniel used for personal messages. Most of the inbox looked normal. Newsletters, advertisements, and occasional conversations with friends. Nothing suspicious appeared at first glance, then she noticed something unusual. Several emails had been deleted recently. Not the typical promotional emails, but entire conversation threads. The dates were recent. Almost daily during the past few weeks, Emily stared at the empty spaces where messages should have been. People delete emails all the time, she reminded herself. But why remove entire conversations so carefully? Her heartbeat started to rise slightly. She closed the laptop and sat back on the couch, trying to calm her thoughts. Maybe Daniel had simply cleaned his inbox. Maybe she was creating problems where none existed, but another memory surfaced in her mind. A few nights earlier, Daniel had received a phone call and stepped outside to answer it. When he returned, he claimed it was a coworker asking about a project. Yet his tone during the call had sounded strangely warm, almost personal. Emily suddenly realized something unsettling. Daniel had never mentioned the coworker's name. Over the next few days, small clues continued stacking together in ways that were becoming harder to ignore. Daniel sent her brief messages from his trip, but the texts felt unusually short and distant. Sometimes hours passed before he responded. One afternoon he accidentally sent a message meant for someone else. The text appeared on Emily's phone for only a second before another message quickly followed. Sorry, wrong chat. Emily read the first message again. Miss you already. Her stomach tightened instantly. When Daniel called later that night, he sounded perfectly normal. He talked about meetings and long work hours as if nothing had happened. Emily listened carefully, searching his voice for hesitation. Everything sounded calm, practiced. When the call ended, she placed her phone down slowly and stared at the dark screen. For weeks she had tried to ignore the growing doubts inside her heart. She had convinced herself that every strange moment had a harmless explanation, but now the pieces were beginning to connect. The secretive phone behavior, the sudden work trips, the deleted conversations, the message that was never meant for her. Emily felt a quiet certainty settle deep in her chest. Daniel wasn't just acting differently, that he was hiding something, and for the first time, she began to suspect that the truth might involve another woman. The message Daniel accidentally sent refused to leave Emily's mind. Two simple words had shattered the fragile explanations she had been holding onto for weeks. Miss you already. He had claimed it was meant for someone else, but the tone of that message didn't sound professional or friendly. It sounded intimate. From that moment, Emily stopped trying to ignore her instincts. Doubt had already entered her heart, and pretending everything was normal no longer felt possible. She needed the truth, no matter how painful it might be. When Daniel returned from his so-called business trip, he acted exactly as he always did. He greeted her with a hug, asked about her week, and talked about meetings and deadlines as if nothing unusual had happened. His calm attitude almost made Emily question herself again, almost, but now she was paying attention to everything. She noticed how quickly he placed his phone face down whenever they sat together. She noticed how he carried it everywhere, even to places where he used to leave it behind without concern. If a message arrived while Emily was nearby, Daniel would glance at it and immediately step away. His caution only made the truth feel closer. Emily didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she watched quietly, waiting for something undeniable. Confronting someone without proof would only give them the opportunity to lie. And lately, Daniel seemed very good at lying. That a few days later another strange moment happened. Daniel told Emily he needed to stay late at work again. The explanation sounded routine now. He grabbed his jacket and left with a quick goodbye, promising he wouldn't be home too late. Something about his tone made Emily pause. Without fully planning it, she picked up her car keys and waited 10 minutes before leaving the house. A quiet feeling pushed her forward. She didn't want to spy on her husband, but the need for clarity had become stronger than her hesitation. Emily drove toward Daniel's office building. The streets were calm, and traffic moved slowly through the evening. When she arrived near the building, she parked across the street and watched the entrance. Minutes passed, then she saw something that made her heart sink. Daniel walked out of the building, but he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him. They were talking closely, their body language relaxed and familiar. The woman laughed at something he said, touching his arm in a way that didn't look professional at all. Emily felt her chest tighten. For a moment she hoped she was misinterpreting what she saw. Maybe the woman was a coworker. Maybe they were simply leaving the office at the same time. But then Daniel did something that erased every doubt. He gently placed his hand on the woman's back as they walked toward the parking lot together. The gesture was casual, natural, and deeply personal. Emily sat frozen in her car as the realization crashed over her. The man she had trusted for 8 years wasn't working late. He wasn't staying at the office because of pressure or deadlines. That he had been meeting someone else. Her vision blurred slightly as memories rushed through her mind. Every late night. Every defensive reaction about his phone. Every vague explanation suddenly made sense. Daniel had been living 2 separate lives. Emily watched as the woman unlocked her car. Daniel leaned closer to say something, and she smiled in a way that felt painfully intimate. After a short conversation, they hugged briefly before getting into their separate vehicles. The moment lasted only seconds, but it confirmed everything. Emily didn't follow them. She didn't need to. The truth was already clear. Driving home felt surreal. The quiet streets looked exactly the same as they always had, but Emily felt like she was seeing the world through a completely different lens. The life she believed in had cracked open in a single evening. When she reached the house, she sat in the parked car for several minutes before going inside. Her emotions shifted rapidly between disbelief, anger, and deep sadness. Part of her still struggled to understand how Daniel could hide something so significant while acting normal every day. Another part of her realized that deception had probably been happening longer than she ever imagined. Later that night Daniel returned home, just like he had promised. He walked through the door with the same calm expression he always carried after a long day at work. He placed his keys on the table and greeted Emily casually. "Late meeting," he said, loosening his tie. Emily studied his face carefully. If she hadn't witnessed the truth herself, she might have believed him completely. The lies sounded effortless. For the first time, Emily noticed how easily he delivered them. There was no hesitation, no visible guilt. He moved through the house comfortably, speaking about his evening as if the story had been rehearsed. But something inside Emily had changed. The confusion that once clouded her thoughts was gone. In its place stood a quiet certainty. She no longer needed to wonder whether Daniel was hiding something. She had already seen the answer with her own eyes. Now the only question left was what she would do with the truth. That night Emily barely slept. The image of Daniel standing beside the other woman replayed in her mind again and again. Every detail was clear. The way they spoke comfortably, the brief hug before leaving, the natural closeness between them. It wasn't something new or accidental. It was the kind of familiarity that only grows over time. For hours she lay awake staring at the ceiling, letting the reality settle inside her. The painful part wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that Daniel had been lying to her repeatedly while pretending everything was normal. Every smile, every casual conversation, every late-night excuse now carried a different meaning. By morning the confusion had faded. What remained was a quiet determination. Emily wasn't interested in guessing anymore. She already knew the truth, and she had no intention of continuing the marriage under a lie. Daniel woke up that morning behaving exactly the same as always. He made coffee, checked his phone, and talked briefly about his plans for the day. If he felt any guilt about the previous night, He hid it well. Emily watched him carefully while sitting across the table. For a moment she almost wondered how someone could act so normal while keeping such a significant secret. But the answer became clear quickly. Daniel had simply grown comfortable with deception. After he finished breakfast, Emily spoke calmly. "Who is she?" Daniel looked up immediately, confusion appearing across his face. "What do you mean?" His reaction was quick and defensive, exactly what Emily expected. For weeks he had avoided the truth with excuses and vague explanations. But this time she wasn't asking out of suspicion, she already had the answer. "The woman you were with last night," Emily continued quietly. "The one outside your office." The color drained slightly from Daniel's face. For the first time since the conversation began, he hesitated. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said after a moment. The denial sounded automatic, almost like a reflex. Emily noticed the familiar pattern instantly. It was the same strategy he had used before: deny everything and hope the doubt disappears. But the difference now was simple. Emily had seen everything. "I was there," she said firmly. "I saw you." Silence filled the room. Daniel looked down at the table, his mind clearly searching for a new explanation. For several seconds he said nothing, and that silence revealed more than any words could. Finally he exhaled slowly. "It's not what you think," he muttered. Emily almost laughed at how predictable the response sounded. Every person caught in a lie seemed to say the exact same thing. "Then explain it," she replied. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking far less confident than before. The calm composure he usually carried had begun to crack. "She's just someone from work," he said. "We've been spending time together because of a project." Emily shook her head immediately. "You don't hug coworkers like that." Daniel opened his mouth to respond but stopped. The truth was beginning to corner him from every direction. For the first time he looked genuinely nervous. "It didn't mean anything," he said quickly. "It just happened." Those words only made things worse. Emily felt a quiet wave of anger rise inside her. After weeks of lying and secret meetings, he was now trying to minimize everything as if it were a small mistake. "Don't insult me like that," she said, her voice steady but cold. "You didn't just meet her once. I saw the way you acted. That wasn't new." Daniel looked away, unable to hold her gaze anymore. The silence between them stretched painfully. The truth was now standing clearly in the room, impossible to hide or ignore. Eventually Daniel spoke again, his voice lower. "It started a few months ago." The confession felt heavy even though Emily had already expected it. "A few months," she repeated quietly. "And you lied every day since then." Daniel tried to explain. He said he hadn't planned for it to happen. He claimed things had become complicated. He talked about stress at work and how the other woman had been there to listen, but none of the explanations changed the reality. Every word only confirmed what Emily already knew, that he had chosen deception again and again. Finally she raised her hand, stopping his attempt to justify the situation. "That's enough." Daniel fell silent. Emily stood up slowly from the table. Her heart still hurt deeply, but something inside her had become stronger than the pain. "I trusted you for 8 years," she said. "And you spent months lying to my face." Daniel looked at her desperately. "I can fix this," he insisted. "We can work through it." Emily shook her head. "Some things, once broken, simply cannot return to what they were before." "Trust was one of those things. You didn't just make a mistake," she replied calmly. "You built a whole secret life." Daniel had no response. For the first time since their marriage began, Emily felt completely certain about her decision. The sadness was still there, but it no longer controlled her. The truth had finally come out, and Daniel had failed to hide it no matter how carefully he tried. And now Emily understood something clearly: the strongest choice she could make was choosing herself.